Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this Monday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm Dave Percy, meteorologist with the National Weather Service, and I'll be hosting today's show. Up first, a hazardous weather graphic. Still have winter weather advisories out here for the Koyukuk Valley, Kobuk Valley, and across the Brooks Range here up to the eastern Beaufort Sea coastline for additional snow and some gusty winds. And that'll be out in all areas through tonight and actually until midnight here on the Arctic coast. And also high wind warning remains out for tonight, tomorrow night into early Wednesday actually, until 6 a.m. Wednesday I believe. That's for the Alaska Range through the passes. Winds gusting as high as 75 miles per hour at times, again mainly through the passes, higher elevations there. And that's out for the next couple of days. And for the satellite imagery, you can see the front that brought all the heavy rain, like Kodiak Island and other areas here, the southwest interior, and good soaking rains all the way up into the north, is moving off to the east here and weakening, as you can tell on the last couple of frames. It's really getting the, starting to break up and get a lot of holes in the clouds there. Some of that's due to crossing the mountainous terrain, but the entire pattern shifting eastward here. So improved quite a bit here as far as, I actually saw some sunshine, Kenai Peninsula, Cook Inlet today, to go along with the gusty wind conditions that were beginning to subside slowly here this afternoon across south central Alaska. Otherwise, we had 40 to 50 mile an hour wind gusts occurring along the southwest coast here. Another low up there in the Chukchi Sea that brought wind gusts to 50 miles an hour. Kotzebue, Kivalina, Cape Lisburne, a gust of 71 miles per hour. Otherwise, McHugh Creek, Turnagain Arm, late last night had a wind gust of 81 miles per hour. And this afternoon, they're still barely gusting to 60 miles an hour as things wind down. And precipitation, about an inch today fell at Cordova. Let's see, Portage Valley had 2.5 inches of rain. That was the heaviest amount around, and that moisture slowly slipping eastward there, about ready to move into Yakutat. And then really this front up through here is breaking up quite a bit. And going to it again, we've got kind of a enhancement in the clouds here. And over the Kuskokwim Valley, McGrath, the northern Kuskokwim Valley had anywhere from 1/2 inch to 2/3 of an inch of liquid precipitation today here. And a lot of that mixed with really a higher elevation, seeing snowfall here with the warmer air coming in, but front moving through, and that should drop the snowfall levels a little bit later on tonight and tomorrow. Otherwise, on the chart, roughly the position of the front right through here, kind of southward, having pushed by the Kenai Peninsula, some clearing in behind, a lot of breezy conditions and showers back here associated with this 990 millibar low off the southwest coast. A couple of troughs swinging across the Alaska Peninsula, this one about ready to swing down to the southeast. And rainfall beginning to increase here along the north coast of the Panhandle. Really not too much in the way of anything measurable yet there. Pretty light, but that'll slowly increase and continue to increase during the night tonight, during the evening tonight and overnight. And then this strong low up off the western Arctic coast there. Again, that's going to keep it windy. Gale warnings are in the marine areas there through tomorrow. And we'll see it really doesn't move much. It kind of pulls up to the north a little bit there. And a trough keeps light snow going here for the western Brooks Range along mountains, western Arctic coast, and possibly down into the western central Seward Peninsula. This will be really light, maybe even flurries, and probably it'll be only some light snow showers could reach St. Lawrence Island. Otherwise, continued showery and breezy, kind of an enhancement with this trough right through here of rain, northeast Bristol Bay across the Aleutian Range. Drying out Kodiak Island. Front really weakening now as it pushes in, just periods of rain. Could be moderate, but mostly light there. Probably Yakutat definitely will see the heaviest amounts. And chance of flurries there on the eastern Arctic coast. Outlook for tomorrow. For Tuesday, again, a repeat here, kind of repositions itself off the back to the northwest a little bit there. Got a trough with some areas of rain or snow showers, just plain rain here down to the south. Another trough here coming across south central Alaska. Looks mostly will be cloudy with periods of light rain and showers scattered across much of the area and the North Gulf Coast. And look for occasional light rain over much of the Panhandle, mainly along the coast here in the north, escaping it down south. And otherwise, high pressure building in over the Bering Sea, making for pretty light wind conditions out there. This system just to the south of the Fox Islands will push up far enough on Wednesday to bring a little bit of an increase in the winds and definitely some rain up into the Alaska Peninsula, back toward Unalaska, then Nikolsky, showers Adak and Atka, high pressure light winds and fair skies northern Bering Sea all the way across as that low drifts northward of Barrow. Still pretty gusty winds, but those winds and snow will shift into the central Arctic coast. Snow showers to the east. Lows for tonight, 30s for the Panhandle, and mostly in the 30s here over the interior, lower 30s to the north and lower 40s here south of the Alaska Range into Bristol Bay and Kodiak Island, upper 40s for the highs tomorrow for the Alaska Peninsula, and above freezing once again for the Arctic coast, mid to upper 30s, and near 40 in the central interior, 45 to 50 south central Alaska, and 40s for the Panhandle. Lows for Wednesday morning. Cooling off now, but mostly in the 20s everywhere north and west of the Alaska Range, near 40 for the southeast coast, followed by highs in the 25 to 35 degree range.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic Tuesday morning. Big swath of IFR here from the southern Bering Sea northeastward, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, over to about Dillingham, and then into almost western Cook Inlet there in the Kuskokwim Valley. Then marginal VFR becomes VFR up here to the northeast, and then IFR along and south of the Brooks Range. VFR on the north side, surrounded by some marginal VFR. IFR here, North Gulf Coast, actually from Prince William Sound and the southeast coast of the Kenai Peninsula, all the way into the north coast of the Panhandle. And for the afternoon, that kind of stays hung up there from roughly Port Alexander on up to Dry Bay. And then marginal VFR, North Gulf Coast, a little remaining IFR here, Prince William Sound, southern slopes of the Brooks Range, or the Alaska Range, also the Brooks Range, along and just south of the crest of the ridge there. Got some IFR persisting, and then this band diminishing tomorrow afternoon, all the way down as it stretches southwest to Kuskokwim Bay and eastward to definitely Dillingham. And marginal VFR with a few breaks out west. And then for Wednesday morning, marginal VFR mostly for the central western Aleutians, all of the Bering Sea. Could be some VFR here showing up along the Yukon River Delta and Valley area. Marginal mostly for the Seward Peninsula, IFR, northwest coast, the Long Mountains, all the way up to about Osage Point Lay. And then a pretty narrow band of lingering IFR here in the central interior from the eastern Kuskokwim Valley and along the Alaska Range northeastward. And then some VFR breaking out lee side of the Alaska Range and marginal to VFR south of the Alaska Range into Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island marginal, Panhandle, marginal VFR, IFR to the east and southeast. For Wednesday afternoon, marginal VFR for all the southeast coast. In the Coast Range here, we've got some IFR on the southern slopes. Same pattern here for the Alaska Range. And then some scattered VFR mixed in with a marginal VFR here for the central interior, Seward Peninsula. And marginal to IFR, western Brooks Range, North Slope and Arctic coast. And some IFR here on the south side of the Alaska Peninsula. And also for the central Aleutians, just north of the Fox Islands, otherwise marginal VFR, the Bering Sea. And for Anatuvik tomorrow, occasional IFR, same forecast for Adigan. Looks like it'll be at some point in the day, IFR. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, go marginal VFR at times. Could be still some chance of lower IFR flying conditions on both the eastern entrances. Rainy IFR to start, improving to marginal VFR. And for windy, occasionally marginal. Isabel, mostly marginal. And Montesta, marginal VFR, that'll be mostly on the southern entrance, I think off to the north and northeast, definitely VFR. And for Tanita, VFR. Portage starting out with IFR flying conditions becoming marginal. And for Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR with the moisture flowing in, probably go IFR into the afternoon. And for the freezing levels here, as you can see that frontal boundary pushing eastward into the northern panhandle or into the central areas tomorrow afternoon or tomorrow morning. And we've got 2,000 foot freezing levels coming back down there, but still 10,000 feet, so good gradient here across the northern panhandle. Otherwise, 2,000 to 4,000 feet over the interior, and the Bering Sea mostly around 2,000 feet, 2,000 to 6,000 near and just south of the Aleutians. Icing, areas of isolated moderate here from Ottenweller Hills, Yukon River, lower Yukon River Valley up to the Brooks Range, and then possible considerable moderate here over the Prince William Sound area, but the greater threat will be here coming onto the Panhandle with that weakening front. Jet stream, 100-knot winds will eventually push that weak front through the Panhandle, and Arctic jet up here about 50 to 60 knots over the northwest interior, associated with that deep low off the western Arctic coast. 9,000 feet southwest, 25 to 35 knots here. Into the southeast interior, up to 55 there with that low just west of the Arctic coast over the Chukchi Sea. 45 knots southwesterlies with that. Otherwise, really light winds out here over the Aleutians, and even interior areas as well, although a couple of bands here, southerlies 20 to 25 lingering. And turbulence, occasional light to isolated moderate chops, especially for small aircraft here, Cook Inlet and the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak, up along the Alaska Range, and also for the western Arctic coast.
I can't really name anyone that has so much integrity as she does to the things that she's accomplishing. It's pretty amazing. Having Claire as a role model, just a strong woman in science and just so smart and so kind. It's just a huge confidence booster. It's that, hey, I could do that too, you know? That's possible, that's successful, that's what I want to do.
I would characterize her as a pioneer in the field.
The amount and quality of the work she's put out is second to none.
I know people who have a lot of tenacity. I know people that have integrity, but it's rare that people have both together in that, that combination that Claire does.
Every morning, Dr. Claire Parkinson gets up before sunrise and runs 2 miles to work. She hasn't missed a day in nearly 40 years. To know the evolution of sea ice and how we observe it from space is to know Claire. This year, she's celebrating 40 years at NASA.
When I arrived at Goddard, which was in July of 1978, it was an incredibly exciting period here. Satellites were pretty new, but a lot of data had been collected.
NASA scientists were inundated with information, and Claire was in a cohort looking at sea ice, trying to make sense of a jumble of very raw, very new data. It was around that time that Claire and her team, at the time led by Dr. Jays Wally, created the principal sea ice record that we use today. How does something like that record help you do your job?
Oh, that record is fundamental to understanding sea ice. So without it, we wouldn't know how rapidly it's changing.
You may not realize it, but Claire's work studying the changing extent of the ice caps deeply affected our understanding of climate change, and relatedly, our understanding of how climate change affects life on Earth.
One of the clearest signals for climate change that resonates with people has been this shrinking of the polar ice cap in the summer that we're able to see because of Claire's work.
After we had a record that was about 15, 20 years long, we started noticing that the extent of the ice in the Arctic was getting smaller over time.
Sea ice is formed on the surface of the ocean, and therefore is made from seawater. The biggest concentration is in the Arctic, and it's also where the biggest loss in sea ice is occurring. Every year, NASA reports on the sea ice minimum and maximum extents. As expected, the data is concerning.
By now, not only has this trend toward lesser ice continued, but it's even accelerated, so that now the decreases are greater than what they had been.
These trends are deeply troubling, but one thing's for sure. Our awareness of shrinking sea ice extent due to climate change was propelled faster and further after Claire Parkinson arrived at NASA.
I mean, she takes her job seriously, and the health and welfare of those instruments in space, yeah, she's on it. You know, it's one of the things you don't worry about because Claire's in the loop on these things. It's going to be fine.
In science, we stand on the shoulders of giants, on the shoulders of those who explored before us. But then, some among us are giants.
For a scientist, it's incredibly exciting to be studying these glaciers and ice sheets right now because they're doing something that hasn't happened in thousands of years. We're watching changes take place that haven't happened since the end of the last ice age. Tuesday was cold, I almost froze my toes. Oh, what's it gonna be next week? Who knows? That's climate. Oh, that's the climate you got. You take a bunch of weather and you average it together and you're doing the climate rock.
At a glacial pace, it means something's happening so slowly you can barely tell it's happening at all. That used to describe the very incremental movement glaciers and ice sheets experienced each year. But now that's changing. We're tagging along with 3 NASA scientists to understand the different lengths they go to not only investigate ice sheets and glaciers, but also communicate their often complicated science to the public. First, let's get oriented. Ice sheets, in pink, pretty much occur in only 2 places, Antarctica and Greenland. Glaciers, in yellow, play a key role draining melt off the ice sheet. Glaciers are also found in the high mountains, but we'll get to those in another episode.
So we know that something's happening in Greenland right now that's unprecedented in the last several thousand years.
That's Dr. Josh Willis, oceanographer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Josh and his team are tackling one of the major environmental challenges of the 21st century, trying to answer fundamental questions about how melting glaciers impact sea level rise.
With my mission, Oceans Melting Greenland, or OMG for short, we're trying to understand just how much of Greenland's melt is caused by the oceans.
Along with being one of NASA's top scientists working on the cryosphere, Josh is passionate about demystifying climate change in typically unconventional ways.
I think by reaching out to people with a little bit of humor, a little bit of fun, maybe a song, you really have the opportunity to help people understand and come to terms with what we're doing to our planet. Because it's definitely happening and it's definitely a big deal, and we need to start preparing for it.
Down at the opposite pole, Dr. Kelly Brunt is getting ready for a major expedition.
In December and January this coming year, I'll actually be in Antarctica down near the South Pole collecting ground-based GPS data.
This is actually Kelly's second expedition to the South Pole. The first occurred in December and January of last year. Both surveys are critical and will help validate data collected by NASA's airborne campaign, Operation Icebridge, and the recently launched satellite mission ISAT-2.
All 3 of these layers, that ground-based, that airborne, and the satellite, are all tied together. The ground-based helps validate both the satellite and the airborne helps give us more validation data for the satellites, but also a bigger story with respect to the depth of the ice sheet and what's going on underneath the surface.
While some scientists are taking measurements in the field, others are looking for answers in physics and lines of code.
For me, those projections that we are doing, they do have a very personal meaning.
Dr. Sophie Nowicki is an ice sheet modeler. That means she and her team have the important job of forecasting how ice will change in the future, which also predicts changes in sea level rise. It's a job she doesn't take lightly, especially since urban planning and infrastructure use her team's models to make decisions about the future and safety of their communities.
When we make those projections that are 100 years in the future, 100 years can seem so far away, like I don't have to worry about it, it's just too far. But actually they are not. It's really like the future that we are looking at that our children or grandchildren will see to experience.
Whether it's learning to communicate in new ways, traversing a swath of Antarctica in a massive piston bully, or taking responsibility for an impactful climate forecast, our NASA explorers are pushing the limits of discovery every day. But on a very human level, they're people with families and friends who have a stake in finding out why and how the planet is changing as rapidly as it is.
Every place, at least so far, that we have found life, we found water along with it. And so when we try to understand the thresholds for life, where life might exist elsewhere in our solar system and the universe, water is one of those things that we look for.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at coastal water forecast for the southern southeast coast, outer coastline 20 to 25 knots from the south, south to southeast, 25 knots on the north coast, seas up there up as high as 11 feet. South 20 knots, Lynn Canal with gale force gusts to 35 knots, southeast 20 for Stevens Passage, and also with 35 knot gusts, southeast 15 for Clarence Strait. And for Wednesday, west-northwest breeze 10 to 15 here along the south coast, and west-southwest at 15 on the north coast. Lynn Canal southerlies at 20 knots. Southeast winds 10 to 15 knots for the central and southern inside waters. Prince William Sound, southeast 20 knots tomorrow, seas 4 feet, and south 20 knots with 9-foot seas here for the eastern North Gulf Coast. And the western North Gulf Coast and the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, all 3 areas. Winds will be out of the south at 25 knots with seas right around 10 feet. Southern Cook Inlet, south winds 30 knots tomorrow with 9-foot seas, and north of the Forelands back down to 25 knots with 7-foot seas. And for Wednesday, southwest winds 20 knots with, let's see, that's looks like 6 to 8-foot seas here for Cook Inlet, and then coming down to 15 knots. Big drop off there for Kamishak Bay and the Barren Islands, both southwest at 15. And the entire North Gulf Coast, the entire stretch there, southwest 15, 8-foot seas, and light winds in Prince William Sound from the south and slight seas. Kodiak Island, small craft advisory, southerlies 25 to 30 knots, strongest in Shelikof Strait, seas highest there on the east side of the marine areas there with 12-foot seas. And then from Sitkinak all the way down to Cape Sarachev, winds southwest 25, seas 13 feet. And the Bering Sea side of the peninsula, winds will be mostly will be southwest at 20, all the way up into Bristol Bay, and they'll kick up to 25 knots there with 6-foot seas. Outlook for Wednesday, winds become kind of lighten up, become variable, and then turn east in the afternoon at about 15 there for Bristol Bay with 4-foot seas, and east winds coming up to 30 knots for the Bering Sea side of the peninsula, southeast 30 Pacific side, and then Castle Cape to Sitkinak, small craft advisories, southeast 25. And Kodiak Island, Shelikof Strait, south at 15 with 3 to 8-foot seas. For the Fox Islands, Unalaska Island, northwest to west, 15 to 20 knots, northeast 15 to 20 for Unmac Island, 15 to 20 knot northeasterlies for Adak and Atkin. Pretty light winds west of Adak, coming down to 10 knots out from Kiska Island to Shemya. And then for Wednesday, the light winds stay light out there, about 20 knots, Samchitka to Adak, and then the central Aleutians northeast to north at 30 with 11 to 13-foot seas, and gales with that next system coming up, 35 to 40 knot winds out of the east and northeast for both Unalaska and Unmac Islands. Southwest coast for tomorrow, we've got west winds 20 knots south of Nunivak Island, northwest 20 for the Pribilofs, And then 25 knot small craft advisory winds from the north and northwest here for the northern Bering Sea and St. Lawrence Island. Outlook for Wednesday, northeast 20 knots here south of Nunivak Island, 10 knots on the north side to St. Lawrence Island, 25 knot northeast winds for the Pribilofs, and west 20 for St. Lawrence Island. Up along the Beaufort Sea coast, lightest winds will be on the east side here, west-southwest at 20 tomorrow, with those seas running at about 4 feet. And the central coast, south winds 30 knots with 13-foot seas, kind of a big jump there. And gale warnings here for the west side, seas up to 14 feet, Cape Beaufort all the way down to Wales. Westerly winds 30 knots, 12 to 14-foot seas. And for Wednesday, hold on to the gales here for the western Arctic coast, 35 knots out of the west, and then those high seas there at 14 feet, and 30-knot winds again from Cape Beaufort to Wales out of the west with 12 to 14-foot seas. Central coast, though, south winds at 30 knots, and the eastern Beaufort Sea coast winds begin to diminish, become a little more westerly as you head over toward Demarcation Point. And for tonight, again, look for some flurries on the eastern Beaufort Sea coast. Areas of light snow, gusty winds continue on the west side. Showers, southern Alaska, and a weakening front tries to push rain into the panhandle. Does a little better job tomorrow, but not that much. Stays kind of unsettled and damp over southern Alaska, as well as the west coast here. Gusty winds with some light snow up along the western Arctic coast. Otherwise, mostly dry here north of the Alaska Range through the upper Tanana Valley 40-mile country. And this next system will come up and bring the bring the gale force winds as that front presses right up toward the Fox Islands on Wednesday, with rain possibly reaching southern Kodiak Island in the late afternoon.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.